Hey y'all, you know what time it is? Woo! Get into it! Get into it! Yes! Hey y'all, I'm back. Just got home from work, and then I'm gonna read, and then I'm gonna go work out. Hope everybody's having a good day. Got my iced chai latte here. And of course, you know, I do not own the music that's playing in the background. Which is rather fitting for the next few chapters we are about to get through. So the last time we were reading the last battle, Eustace, Jill, Puzzle, Tyrion, Jewel the Unicorn, oh, what is the eagle's name? Oh no. Farsight the eagle. I couldn't get his name out. And Poggin, the dwarf, they all gathered a couple of the talking dogs and a bear and a boar to try to help them face the Calormans, which they were able to be successful. Tyrion threw in the ape shift into the stable, and this blue greenish light has come out. We still don't know what's in the stable, but every time somebody has gone into it, they've either ended up dead, or they can't, or if it was a talking beast, they can't talk anymore. So in this next chapter, we're about to find out what is going on in the stable. Why is this weird stuff happening? And is it Tash in there, or is it Aslan? We don't know. So we are going to find out. And as I always say, you don't have to watch these videos when they go live. You can always go to the YouTube channel and check out the more recent readings for any of the books that I've posted on there. And yeah, like, share, subscribe, please, to the YouTube channel. I've been posting it on my page. Take some time to do that. If you think your friends will love it, this is something I do for fun. So without further ado, we will begin. Chapter 12. Through the Stable Door. Jill ought to have been back at the White Rock already, but she had quite forgotten that part of her orders in the excitement of watching the fight. Now she remembered. She turned at once and ran to it, and arrived there barely a second before the others. It thus happened that all of them for a moment had their backs to the enemy. They all wheeled round the moment they had reached it. A terrible sight met their eyes. A Calorman was running toward the stable door, carrying something that kicked and struggled. As he came between them and the fire, they could see clearly both the shape of the man and the shape of what he carried. It was Eustace. Tyrion and the unicorn rushed out to rescue him, but the Calorman was now far nearer to the door than they. Before they had covered half the distance, he had flung Eustace in and shut the door on him. Half a dozen more Calormans had run up behind him. They formed a line on the open space before the stable. There was no getting at it now. Even then, Jill remembered to keep her face turned aside, well away from her bow. "Even if I can't stop blubbing, I won't get my string wet," she said. "Where arrows?" said Poggin suddenly. Everyone ducked and pulled his helmet well over his nose. The dogs crouched behind, but though a few arrows came their way, it soon became clear that they were not being shot at. Griffel and his dwarves were at their archery again. This time they were coolly shooting at the Calormans. "Keep it up, boys," came Griffel's voice. "All together, carefully. We don't want any of the Calormans any more than we want monkeys or lions or kings. The dwarves are for the dwarves!" Whatever else you may say about dwarves, no one can say they aren't brave. They could easily have got away to some safe place. They preferred to stay and kill as many as both sides as they could, except when both sides were kind enough to save them the trouble by killing one another. They wanted Narnia for their own. What perhaps they had not taken into account was that the Calormans were mail-clad, and the horses had had no protection. Also, the Calormans had a leader. Rishta Tarkan's voice cried out, "30 of you keep watch on those fools by the White Rock. The rest after me, that we may teach these sons of Earth a lesson." Tyrion and his friend, still panting from their fight and thankful for a few moments' rest, stood and looked on while the Tarkan led his men against the dwarves. It was a strange scene by now. The fire had sunk low. The light it gave was now less of a darker red. As far as one could see, the whole place of assembly was now empty except for the dwarves and the Calormans. In that light, one couldn't make out much of what was happening. It sounded as if the dwarves were putting up a good fight. Tyrion could hear Griffle using dreadful language, and every now and then the Tarkhan calling, "Take all you can alive! Take them alive!" Whatever that fight may have been like, it did not last long. The noise of it died away. Then Jill saw the Tarkhan coming back to the stable. 11 men followed him, dragging 11 bound dwarfs. "Throw them into the shrine of Tash," said Rishta Tarkhan. And when the 11 dwarves, one after the other, had been flung or kicked into that dark doorway, and the door had been shut again, he bowed low to the stable and said, "These also are for thy burnt offering, Lord Tash." And all the Calormans banged the flats of their swords on their shields and shouted, "Tash! Tash! The great god Tash! Inexorable Tash!" The little party by the white rock watched these doings and whispered to one another. They had found a trickle of water coming down the rock, and all had drunk eagerly, Jill and Poggin and the king in their hands, while the 4-footed ones lapped from the little pool which had been made at the foot of the stone. Such was their thirst that it seemed the most delicious drink they had ever had in their lives, and while they were drinking they were perfectly happy and could not think of anything else. "I feel it in my bones," said Poggin, "that we shall all one by one pass through that dark door before morning. I can think of 100 deaths I would rather have died." "It is indeed a grim door," said Tyrion. "It is more like a mouth." "Oh, can we do anything to stop it?" said Jill in a shaken voice. "Nay, fair friend," said Jewel, nosing her gently. "It may be for us the door to Aslan's country, and we shall sup at his table tonight." Rishta Tarkhan turned his back on the stable and walked slowly to a place in front of the white rock. "Hearken," he said. "If the boar and the dogs and the unicorn will come over to me and put themselves in my mercy, their lives shall be spared. The boar shall go to a cage in the Tisrock's garden, the dogs to the Tisrock's kennels, and the unicorn, when I have sawn off his horn, shall draw a cart. But the eagle, the children, and he who is the king shall be offered to Tash this night." The only answer was growls. "Get on, warriors," said Tarkhan. "Kill the beasts, but take the 2-legged ones alive." And then the last battle of the last king of Narnia began. And yes, Aaron, don't saw off a unicorn's horn. That's literally death. You don't do that. That's not cool. Kind of like when people... No shade to anybody that does this, but if I ever get a cat or a dog, I would never declaw them. Like, that's painful. That's incredibly painful. And as I said, there's no shade to anybody that does that, but for me personally, I would never do that. Let's see. What made it hopeless, even apart from the numbers of the enemy, was the spears. The Calormans, who had been with the ape almost from the beginning, had no spears. That was because they had come into Narnia by ones and twos, pretending to be peaceful merchants, and of course they had carried no spears, for a spear is not a thing you can hide. The new ones must have come in later, after the ape was already strong and they could march openly. The spears made all the difference. With a long spear you could kill a boar before you are in reach of his tusks, and a unicorn before you are in reach of the horn. You are very quick and keep your head. But now the leveled spears were closing in on Tyrion and his last friends. Next minute they were all fighting for their lives. In a way, it wasn't quite so bad as you might think when you're using every muscle to the full, ducking under a spear point here, leaping over it there, lunging forward, darting back, wheeling round. You haven't much time to feel either frightened or sad. Tyrion knew he could do nothing for the others now. They were all doomed together. He vaguely saw the boar go down on one side of him and Jewel fighting furiously on the other. Out of the corner of one eye he saw, but only just saw, a big Calorman pulling Jill away somewhere by her hair, but he hardly thought about any of these things. His only thought was now to sell his life as dearly as he could. The worst of it was that he couldn't keep to the position in which he had started under the white rock. A man who is fighting a dozen enemies at once must take his chances wherever he can. Must dart in wherever he sees an enemy's breast or neck unguarded. In a very few strokes this may get you quite a distance from the spot where you began. Tyrion soon found that he was getting further and further to the right and nearer to the stable. He had a vague idea in his mind that there was some good reason for keeping away from it, but he couldn't now remember what the reason was. And anyway, he couldn't help it. All at once, everything came quite clear. He found he was fighting the Tarkhan himself. The bonfire was straight in front. He was in fact fighting in the very doorway of the stable, for it had been opened and 2 Calormans were holding the door, ready to slam it shut the moment he was inside. He remembered everything now, and realized that the enemy had been edging him to the stable on purpose ever since the fight began. And while he was thinking this, he was fighting the Tarkhan as hard as he could. A new idea came into Tyrion's head. He dropped his sword, darted forward, and under the sweep of the Tarkhan's scimitar, seized his enemy by the belt with both hands, and jumped back into the stable, shouting, "Come in and meet Tash yourself!" There was a deafening noise, as when the ape had been flung in. The earth shook, and there was a blinding light. The Calorman soldiers outside screamed, "Tash! Tash!" and banged the door. If Tash wanted their own captain, Tash must have him. They, at any rate, did not want to meet Tash. For a moment or two, Tyrion did not know where he was, or even who he was. Then he steadily, he blinked and looked around. It was not dark inside the stable as he had expected. He was in a strong light. That was why he was blinking. He turned to look at Rishta Tarkhan, but Rishta was not looking at him. Rishta gave a great wail and pointed. Then he put his hands before his face and fell flat, face downward on the ground. Tyrion looked at the direction where the Tarkhan had pointed, and then he understood. A terrible figure was coming toward him. It was far smaller than the shape they had seen from the tower, though still much bigger than a man, and it was the same. It was a vulture's head and 4 arms. Its beak was open and its eyes blazed. A croaking voice came from its beak.
"Thou hast called me into Narnia, Rishta Tarkhan. Here I am. What hast thou to say?"
But the Tarkhan neither lifted his face from the ground nor said a word. He was shaking like a man with a bad hiccup. He was brave enough in battle, but half his courage had left him earlier that night when he first began to suspect that there might be a real Tash. The rest of it had left him now. With a sudden jerk, like a hen stooping to pick up a worm, Tash pounced on the miserable Rishta, tucked him under the upper of his 2 right arms. Then Tash turned his head sideways to fix Tyrion with one of his terrible eyes, for of course, having a bird's head, he could look at you straight. But immediately, from behind Tash, strong and calm as the summer sea, a voice said, "Begone, monster, and take your lawful prey to your own place, in the name of Aslan and Aslan's great father, the Emperor over the sea." So that, kids, is Tash, the evil god Tash of Calorma. Told you, very gruesome looking. Cannot wait to see this in the Netflix series, because it is going to be super, super cool. It's got to be terrifying. Has to be. Got great people in cinema that have wonderful prosthetic and makeup skills. Just saying. I know a couple of them, actually. The hideous creature vanished with the Tarkhan still under his arm, and Tyrion turned to see who had spoken. And what he saw then set his heart beating, as if it had never beaten in any fight. 7 kings and queens stood before him, all with crowns on their heads and all in glittering clothes, but the kings wore fine mail as well as had their swords drawn in their hands. Tyrion bowed courteously and was about to speak when the youngest of the queens laughed. He stared hard at her face and then gasped with amazement, for he knew her. It was Jill. But not Jill as he had last seen her, with her face all dirt and tears and an old drill dress having slipping off one shoulder. Now she looked cool and fresh as if she had come from bathing. And at first he thought she looked older, but then didn't. And he could have made up his mind at that point, and then he saw that the youngest of the kings was Eustace. But he also was changed as Jill was changed. Tyrion suddenly felt awkward about coming among these people with the blood and dust and sweat of a battle still on him. Next moment he realized that he was not in that state at all. He was fresh and cool and clean, and dressed in such clothes as he would have worn for a great feast at Cair Paravel, which I want you all to guess, for those who've been paying attention, who are these 7 people that he's just met? So we got Jill and Eustace, but let's name the others that may be involved. Sire, said Jill, coming forward and making a beautiful curtsy, let me make you known to Peter the High King over all kings in Narnia. Tyrion had no need to ask which was the High King, for he remembered his face. From his dream, he stepped forward, sank on one knee, and kissed Peter's hand. High King, he said, you are welcome to me. And the king raised him and kissed him on both cheeks as a High King should. Then he led him to the eldest of the queens, but even she was not old. There were no gray hairs on her head and no wrinkles on her cheek, and said, Sir, this is that Lady Polly who came into Narnia on the first day when Aslan made the trees grow and the beasts talk. He brought him next to a man whose golden beard flowed over his breast and whose face was full of wisdom. And this, he said, is the Lord Diggory who was with her on that day. And this is my brother, King Edmund. And this is my sister, the Queen Lucy. Sir, said Tyrion, when he had greeted all these, if I have read the Chronicle right, there should be another. Has not your majesty 2 sisters? Where is the Queen Susan? My sister, answered Peter shortly and gravely, is no longer a friend of Narnia. Yes, said Eustace, and whenever you've tried to get her to come and talk about Narnia, do anything about Narnia, she says, what wonderful memories you have. Fancy you're still thinking about all those funny games we used to play when we were children. Oh, Susan, said Jill, she's interested in nothing nowadays except nylons and lipstick and invitations. She's always a jolly sight too keen on being grown up. Grown up indeed, said the Lady Polly. I wish she would grow up. She wasted all her school time wanting to be the age she is now, and she'll waste all the rest of her life trying to stay that age. Her whole idea is to race on to the silliest time of one's life as quick as she can, and then stop there as long as she can. Well, don't let us talk about that now, said Peter. Look, here are lovely fruit trees. Let us taste them. And then, for the first time, Tyrion looked about him and realized how very queer this adventure was. So, we're going on to the next chapter, but let's talk about something. So, there is a beautiful, and I will try to find it and make sure it's okay to read, at least for the kids for story time. I might have to do that for my adult channel. Well, young adult / adult channel of reading for story time. When I get that taken care of later on at the end of the summer. Let's talk about Susan and why she isn't back. Now, for those who are familiar with the Chronicles of Narnia and are very steadfast in the reading of it, the reason why Susan was not able to come back is a bit more complicated than the fact that she was too grown or trying to grow up. It comes from the fact that there are a lot of people who try to abandon their childhood fancies and memories as if to suggest they were juvenile or not as important. It also suggests, because they mentioned nylons and lipstick and all that, is because she was trying to be an adult, trying to be a woman. So, she's dating, she's thinking about boys, she's thinking about, her future and marriage. And my thing is this: you should never relinquish your childhood spirit just to grow up. There are other themes that are being alluded to as to why Susan is not allowed to come back to Narnia, but that's a whole nother conversation for another day. So there is going to be a reveal in this story that I hope you all are ready for, and it's going to throw a lot of people who haven't read this book a bit of a doozy, I'm just saying. And yes, Susan is not able to come back to Narnia because she has relinquished that side of herself that would have made her a friend of Narnia. Aging is an inevitability. Age is a state of mind. Just because you grow older doesn't mean that you can't have fun, that you can't be joyful and exuberant and have that childlike just fanciful energy, and you can still be an adult. Like, I am 29 years old, but a lot of people don't believe I'm the age I say I am because I carry myself in a very youthful, exuberant demeanor. Because I haven't lost that childlike. My love of life and my zest for life has not been lost just because I've grown up. And when that happens, I know it may seem cool to like, oh, I want to be an adult, I want to be taken seriously, I want to be mature and all that. That comes with time, rather than forcing that stuff to happen or trying to do things you think are going to make you mature or adult. Stay as young as possible. Love being a kid. Y'all don't have any responsibility right now other than going to school and getting great grades and pursuing a future of some kind. Whether it's college, whether it's the military, whether it's trade school, whether it's cosmetology school, building your own business, whatever you want to do the best at it and go and pursue it with gusto and with passion and speed. Because the only person standing in the way of your dreams and your success is yourself. And Susan's not a bad person, because obviously we've read other books with her in it, and she's been very helpful to the people of Narnia, but her time is done because she has relinquished her childlike innocence to go on to adult things, and there's nothing wrong with that. So I just had to stop there to give some context as to why they mentioned all that stuff, because like Lucy and Edmund are pretty much like young adults, like they're in their, I want to say like 18, 19, 20, like around that age group, which I have people that I work with in the past that talk so much about, oh, I can't wait to be this age and do all this stuff. Please stay young as long as possible. I know it may seem attractive to want to jumpstart, but you never get that time back. Please stay as young as you can so that when you get older, you can appreciate what it was to be youthful, what it was to be young, and to help spur somebody else along. That's all I gotta say about that. Chapter 13. How the dwarves refused to be taken in. Tyrion had thought, or he would have thought if he had time to think at all, that they were inside a little thatched stable about 12 feet long and 6 feet wide. In reality, they stood on grass. The deep blue sky was overhead, and the air which blew gently on their faces was that of a day in early summer. Not very far away from them rose a grove of trees, thickly leaved, but under every leaf there peeped out the gold or faint yellow or purple or growing red fruits such as no one had seen in our world. The fruit made Tyrion feel that it must be autumn, but there was something in the feel of the air that told him that it could not be later than June. They had all moved toward the trees. Everyone raised his hand to pick the fruit he best liked the look of, and then everyone paused for a second. This fruit was so beautiful that each felt, it can't be meant for me. Surely we're not allowed to pluck it. It's all right, said Peter. I know what we're all thinking, but I'm quite sure we needn't. I've a feeling we've got to the country where everything is allowed. Here goes then, said Eustace, and they all began to eat. What was the fruit like? Unfortunately, no one can describe a taste. All I can say is that, compared with those fruits, the freshest grapefruit you've ever eaten was dull, and the juiciest orange was dry, and the most melting pear was hard and woody, and the sweetest wild strawberry was sour. And there were no seeds or stones and no wasps. If you had once eaten that fruit, all the nicest things in this world would taste like medicines after it. But it can't be described. You can't find out what it's like unless you get to that country and taste it for yourself. When they had eaten enough, Eustace said to King Peter, You haven't told us how you got here. You were just going to when King Tyrion turned up. There's not much to tell, said Peter. Edmund and I were standing on the platform when we saw your train coming. I remember thinking it was taking the bend far too fast. And I remember thinking how funny it was that our people were probably in the same train, though Lucy didn't know about it. Your people, High King? Said Tyrion. I mean my father and mother. Edmund and Lucy's and mine. Why were they? Said Jill. You don't mean to say they know about Narnia? Oh, no, it had nothing to do with Narnia. They were on their way to Bristol. I'd only heard they were going that morning, but Edmund said they'd been bound to be going by that train. And what happened then? Said Jill. Well, it's not very easy to describe, is it, Edmund? Said the High King. Not very, said Edmund. It wasn't at all like that other time when we were pulled out of our own world by magic. There was a frightful roar and something hit me with a bang, but it didn't hurt. And I felt not so much scared as, well, excited. Oh, and this one queer thing. I had a rather sore knee from a hack at Rugger. I noticed it suddenly gone, and I felt very light, and then we were here. Pay attention to what Edmund just described. I'll repeat myself. It wasn't at all like that other time when we were pulled out of our own world by magic. There was a frightful roar and something hit me with a bang. But it didn't hurt, and I felt not so much scared as, well, excited. Oh, and this one queer thing. I had a rather sore knee from a hack at Rugger, which rugby is the game. I noticed it had suddenly gone, and I felt very light, and then here we are.
It was much the same for us in the railway carriage, said the Lord Diggory, wiping the last traces of the fruit from his golden beard. Only I think you and I, Polly, chiefly felt that we'd been unstiffened. You youngsters won't understand, but we stopped feeling old.
Youngsters, indeed, said Jill. I don't believe you two really are much older than we are. Well, if we aren't, we have been, said the Lady Polly. And what's been happening since you got here, said Eustace. Well, said Peter, for a long time, nothing happened. And then the door opened. The door, said Tyrion. Yes, said Peter, the door you came in, or came out by. Have you forgotten? But where is it? Look, said Peter and pointed. Tyrion looked and saw the queerest and most ridiculous thing that you could imagine. Only a few yards away, clear to be seen in the sunlight, there stood up a wooden door frame, and round it the framework of the doorway. Nothing else, no walls, no roof. He walked toward it, bewildered, and the others followed, watching to see what he would do. He walked round to the other side of the door, but it looked just the same from the other side. He was still in the open air, on a summer morning. The door was simply standing up by itself as if it had grown there like a tree. Fair sir, said Tyrion to the High King, this is a great marvel. It is the door you came through with that Calorman 5 minutes ago, said Peter, smiling. But did I come in out of the wood into the stable, whereas this seems to be a door leading from nowhere to nowhere? It looks like that if you walk round it, said Peter, but put your eye to that place where there is a crack between two of the plates and look through. Tyrion put his eye to the hole. At first he could see nothing but blackness, but then as his eyes grew used to it, he saw the dull red glow of a bonfire that was nearly going out. And above that, in a black sky, stars. Then he could see dark figures moving about or standing between him and the fire. So this is what Tyrion sees in the wood. There's Peter over here looking cool, and Tyrion's just amazed. Which is very reminiscent to the door that they made in Prince Caspian, if you remember that. He could hear them talking, and the voices were like that of the Calormans, so he knew that he was looking out through the stable door into the darkness of Lantern Waste, where he had fought his last battle. The men were discussing whether to go in and look for Rishta Tarkan or to set fire to the stable. He looked round again and could hardly believe his eyes. There was the blue sky overhead and grassy country spreading as far as he could see in every direction, and his new friends all round him laughing. It seems then, said Tyrion, smiling himself, that the stable seen from within and the stable seen from without are two different places.
Oh, excuse me. Yes, said the Lord Diggory, its inside is bigger than outside.
Yes, said Queen Lucy, in our world too. A stable once had something inside that was bigger than our whole world. It was the first time she had spoken, and from the thrill in her voice, Tyrion now knew why. She was drinking everything in him even more deeply than the others. She had been too happy to speak. He wanted to hear her speak again, so he said, Of your courtesy, madam, tell on. Tell me your whole adventure. After the shock and the noise, said Lucy, we found ourselves here, and we wondered at the door, as you did. Then the door opened for the first time, and there came through a big man with a naked sword. We saw by his arms that he was a Calorman. He took his stand beside the door with his sword raised, resting on his shoulder, ready to cut down anyone who came through. We went to speak to him, but we thought he could neither see nor hear us. and he never looked round in the sky and the sunlight and the grass. I think he couldn't see them either. So then we waited a long time, though we heard the bolt being drawn on the other side of the door, but the man didn't get ready to strike with his sword till he could see who was coming in. So we suppose he had been told to strike some and spare others. But at that very moment when the door opened, all of a sudden Tash was there, on this side of the door. None of us saw where he came from. And through the door there came a big cat. It gave one look at Tash and ran for its life, just in time for it pounced at it, and the door hit his beak as it was shut. The man could see Tash. He turned very pale, bowed down before the monster, but it vanished away. Then we waited a long time. At last the door opened for the third time, and there came in a young Culloden. I liked him. The sentinel at the door started and looked very surprised when he saw him. I think he'd been expecting someone quite different.
I see it all now, said Eustace. The cat was going to go in first, and the sentry had orders to do him no harm. Then the cat was to come out and say he'd been seeing that beastly Tash lad and pretend to be frightened to scare the other animals. What about Shift? Never guessed was the real Tash would turn up, so Ginger came out really frightened. And after that, Shift would send in anyone he wanted to get rid of, and the sentry would kill them. And, friend, said Tyrion softly, you hinder the lady in her tale.
Well, said Lucy, the sentry was surprised. That gave the other man just time to get on guard. They had a fight. He killed the sentry and flung him outside the door. Then he came walking slowly forward to where we were.
Oh, excuse me, I'm sorry, y'all. Somebody must be talking about me. Hey, Carlton. Thanks for watching.
Thank you. He could see us and everything else. We tried to talk to him, but he was rather like a man in a trance. He kept on saying, Tash, Tash, where is Tash? I go to Tash. So we gave it up, and he went somewhere else. Over there. I liked him. And after that...
Ugh, Lucy made a face. After that, said Edmund, someone flung a monkey through the door, and Tash was there again. My sister is so tender-hearted, and she doesn't like to tell you that Tash made one peck, and the monkey was gone. Serves him right, said Eustace. All the same, I hope he'll disagree with Tash, too. And after that, said Edmund, came about a dozen dwarves, and then Jill and Eustace, and last of all, yourself. I hope Tash ate the dwarves, too, said Eustace. Little swine.
No, he didn't, said Lucy. And don't be horrid. They're still here. In fact, you can see them from there. I've tried and tried to make friends with them, but it's no use.
Friends? With them? Cried Eustace. If you knew how those dwarves have been behaving.
Oh, stop it, Eustace, said Lucy. Do come and see them. King Tyrion, perhaps you could do something with them.
I can feel no great love for dwarves today, said Tyrion. Yet at your asking, lady, I would do a greater thing than this.
Lucy led the way, and soon they could all see the dwarves. They had a very odd look about them. They weren't strolling about or enjoying themselves, nor were they lying down and having a rest. They were sitting very close together in a little circle facing one another. They had never looked round or taken any notice of the humans till Lucy and Tyrion were almost near enough to touch them. And the dwarves all cocked their heads as if they couldn't see anyone, but were listening hard and trying to guess by the sound of what was happening.
Look out, said one of them in a surly voice. Mind where you're going. Don't walk into our faces. All right, said Eustace indignantly. We're not blind. We've got eyes in our heads. They must be darn good ones if you could see and hear, said the dwarf, whose name was Diggle. In where? Asked Edmund. Why, you boneheaded, here, of course, said Diggle, in this pitch-black, poky, smelly little hole of a stable. Are you blind? Said Tyrion. Ain't we all blind in the dark? Said Diggle.
But it isn't dark, you poor stupid dwarf, said Lucy. Can't you see? Look up. Look round. Can't you see the sky and the trees and the flowers? Can't you see me?
How in the name of all humbug can I see what ain't there? And how can I see you any more than you can see me in this pitch darkness?
But I can see you, said Lucy. I'll prove I can see you. You've got a pipe in your mouth.
Anyone that knows the smell of tobacco can tell that, said Diggle.
Oh, the poor things. This is dreadful, said Lucy. Then She had an idea. She stooped and picked some wild violets. "Listen, dwarf," she said. "If your eyes were wrong, perhaps your nose is all right. Can you smell that?" She leaned across and held the fresh, damp flowers to Diggle's ugly nose. But she had to jump back quickly in order to avoid a blow from his hard little fist. "None of that!" he shouted. "How dare you? What do you mean by shoving a lot of filthy stable litter in my face? There was a thistle in it, too. It's like your sauce. And who are you, anyway?" "Earthman," said Tyrion. "She is the Queen Lucy, sent hither by Aslan and out of the past. And it is for her sake alone, that I, Tyrion, your lawful king, do not cut all your heads from your shoulders, proved and twice proved traitors that you are." "Well, if it doesn't beat everything," exclaimed Diggle. "How can you go on talking all that rot? Your wonderful lion didn't come and help you, did he? Thought not. And now, even now, when you've beaten and shoved into this black hole, just the same as the rest of us, you're still at your old game. Starting a new lie, trying to make us believe we're none of us shut up and it ain't dark and heaven knows what." "There is no black hole, save in your own fancy, fool." "Come out of it." And leaning forward, he caught Diggle by the belt and the hood and swung him right out of the circle of the dwarves. But the moment Tyrion put him down, Diggle darted back to his place among the others, rubbing his nose and howling. Oh, excuse me, I got a hair tangle, y'all. My apologies. There we go. "Ow, ow! What did you do that for? Banging my face against the wall. You've nearly broken my nose." "Oh, dear," said Lucy. "What are we to do for them?" "Leave him alone," said Eustace, but as he spoke, the earth trembled. The sweet air grew suddenly sweeter. A brightness flashed behind them. All turned. Tyrion turned last because he was afraid. There stood his heart's desire, huge and real, the golden lion Aslan himself, and already the others were kneeling in a circle around his forepaws and burying their hands and faces in his mane as he stooped his great head to touch them with his tongue. Then he fixed his eyes upon Tyrion, and Tyrion came near, trembling, and flung himself at the lion's feet, and the lion kissed him and said, "Well done, last of the kings of Narnia, who stood firm at the darkest hour." "Aslan," said Lucy through her tears, will you do something for these poor dwarfs?" "Dearest, I will show you both what I can and what I cannot do." He came close to the dwarves and gave a low growl. Low, but it set all of the air shaking. But the dwarves said to one another, "Hear that? That's the gang at the other end of the stable, trying to frighten us. They do it with a machine of some kind. Don't take any notice. They won't take us again." Aslan raised his head and shook his mane. Instantly a glorious feast appeared on the dwarves' knees, pies and tongues and pigeons and trifles and ices, and each dwarf had a goblet of good wine in his right hand, but it wasn't much use. They began eating and drinking greedily enough, but it was clear that they couldn't taste it properly. They thought they were eating and drinking only the sort of things you might find in a stable. One said he was trying to eat hay, and another said he had got a bit of old turnip, and a third said he found a raw cabbage leaf. And they raised golden goblets of rich red wine to their lips and said, "Ugh, fancy drinking dirty water out of a trough that a donkey's been at. Never thought we'd come to this." But very soon, every dwarf began suspecting that every other dwarf had found something nicer than he had. And they started grabbing and snatching and went on to quarreling, till in a few minutes there was a free fight and all the good food was smeared on their faces and clothes or trodden underfoot. But when at last they sat down to nurse their black eyes and their bleeding noses, they said, "Well, at any rate, there's no humbug here. We haven't let anyone take us in. The dwarves are for the dwarves." "You see," said Aslan, "they will not let us help them. They have chosen cunning instead of belief. Their prison is only in their own minds, yet they are in that prison, and so afraid of being taken in that they cannot be taken out. But come, children, I have other work to do." He went to the door, and they all followed him. He raised his head and roared, "Now it is time! Time! Time!" So loud that it could have shaken the stars. The door flew open. And that is where we will end. And we only, literally, we only have 3 chapters left, y'all, and we are done. I hope you've been enjoying this thus far. Because I have. I love reading for you all. It's very entertaining for me. Because reading is not just fundamental. It is essential. It helps you learn different languages, learn about different cultures, different people, different perspectives, different walks of life. And it doesn't matter how old or young you are. You should always be reading. Whether it's a book, a newspaper, a magazine clipping, a manga, a comic book, a graphic novel, a comic strip, you should always, always be reading. Because reading takes you not only to different worlds, but shows you a little piece of yourself that you didn't know was there or that you forgotten was there. That's why I love these books, because they always help remind me that magic is all around us. Life and nature has its own magic. And God has a beautiful bounty in the world of which we live in. Even though there's a lot of hateful and crazy things going on, life is still magical. I'll see you next time, y'all.